Thanks, Kevin. Welcome to Chicago Founder Stories here at 1871, Chicago's new digital startup hub. We have a great speaker tonight, Dag Kittlaus, founder of Siri. Thank you, Dag, for being here. Great to have you.
Pleasure.
Really a great treat. Thank you. So we have just a quick announcement, which is now we've done 6 of these, I think. The videos get a lot of views on Built in Chicago in 1871. In order to make them more accessible, we've put them on a new site, coolerbysthelake.com, where we'll also blog follow-up to some of the questions people have out of this. So we have a special treat tonight. Dag Kittlaus, who's a wonderful founder, a Chicagoan, who also was a founder out in the Valley. So it'll be an interesting combination. We had that with Chuck Templeton, and it'll be interesting to hear your perspective on so many things. But you have a great story. It's a story, a lot of us know some of the headlines, which product most of us probably have on our phones, are familiar with, and it's a story we've read about. We know about the great success. But this wasn't your first entrepreneurial experience, was it, Dag?
I've had a few down the road.
So take us back to the beginning, because a lot of people have been multi-time entrepreneurs. What was your first entrepreneurial experience? When did you do it? Tell us the story of your first time as an entrepreneur.
Starting with the paper route?
Sure.
Actually, I come from a very entrepreneurial family. My brother's an entrepreneur, sitting up here. My dad's an entrepreneur. So we've always been doing something or another. And we've kind of been working, from a very young age. And but the first, I think, sort of notable story was when my brother and I decided to, can you guys hear me?
I want to pull it up a little. There.
Can you guys hear me in the back okay? Okay, good. We decided to make a T-shirt for Taste of Chicago.
Where you living at the time?
So we lived in Chicago.
Okay.
And my dad, we're bringing this idea to my dad, and we said, we're going to make a T-shirt. He's like, yeah, that sounds good, sounds good. So we designed a T-shirt for Taste of Chicago that we put in a bunch of backpacks and ran around and
what was the T-shirt?
peddled it. It was basically, it looked like a mouth that was biting into a hot dog, and out of the hot dog came like the Sears Tower and the Willis Tower, I guess they call it now. I don't call it that anymore. The Hancock, and the buildings of Chicago were coming. So we ran around and basically peddled this T-shirt, and went back to my dad like 3 days later, and he said, how did it go? And
how did it go?
My brother and I took a garbage bag and dumped $8,000 onto the table.
Wow.
Out of the blue. So that got his attention. So even though he was an entrepreneur, he appreciated a project like that. So we ended up doing things like T-shirts and other, kind of selling different things that we would come up with and dream up with in college. And
that's fun.
One time I had an idea for a shirt and ended up stuffing my car with 2,000 folded up T-shirts. I mean, you couldn't, from the front seat back and including every square inch of the trunk, there was T-shirts. It was cotton. I mean, if I got pulled over, I think I'd be in trouble.
Yeah, it looked like you stole them.
So we drove around schools.
I did have a short-lived T-shirt business. It involved Calvin and Hobbes, and apparently we didn't have the permission of the illustrator. But they come up with some clever sayings, things that I probably wouldn't tell my kids that I had on a T-shirt. But it sold. They sell well. People like a good laugh. So you're like me. You're someone who didn't start your career as an entrepreneur, and you're not an engineer. And yet you've obviously been involved in very technical companies and had a lot of success. Talk a little bit about the path from being someone who didn't have an engineering background and didn't start in tech, and how you got there. Talk about that transition, how you got from where you are to there.
So I joke with these world-class engineers that I was working with at Siri, the 20-somethings who would give me a date on some software build, and I would say, I know you guys can do it quicker than that. And they said, well, we have the following issues. And I said, look, don't talk to me like that. I've been coding since before you were born. and it's true, because I had a Commodore VIC-20 when I was in high school, and I used to code a little bit in BASIC. But what I don't tell them is I haven't coded since. So that was how I built a little credibility with the engineers. But I got into technology basically. I had started a company that was reselling network time, like long-distance services and internet access. We were actually one of the first companies that ever put those two things together. This is back in the 90s, or the early 2000s, or no, this is 1994.
1994, wow.
Yeah, 1994.
So right before the big telecom boom really took off.
Yeah, exactly.
So you were in a good place.
In a good place, but I was on a plane, and I read an article about a company called Level 3 Communications, and how they were going to disrupt, voice services and internet with something called IP, Internet Protocol. And by the time I got off that plane, I realized that the company that I had was going to get essentially outdated. And I said, I got to get to know this technology. And I just got obsessed with Internet Protocol, and I just started reading everything I possibly could get, every bit of information. I mean, this is back in the early days of the Internet, so it's not like today.
It was a little more work back then.
It was a lot more work, and I think I was using, Alta Vista or something to try to find information. But I just got obsessed with this, and I would basically create my own textbooks by printing out every bit of information I could about this technology and figuring out how we could apply it and knowing it's going to sort of disintermediate.
So talk about that. You created textbooks. So
yeah.
Tell us about, because I blogged about this today or yesterday on Built in Chicago and Cooler by the Lake, which is this question of founder market fit. And the founders who are most successful really understand their space.
Right.
And some people like Brian Johnson, and he kind of grown up in that space.
Right.
Other people have to immerse themselves to learn it. So talk about this, because I've never heard of anybody creating textbooks themselves for their own. So talk about it. Talk about this and what you got out of it. Why did once you read it, a lot of people just throw it away. So why? Yeah. What about this really made it important to you?
Well, I recognized that something that I had invested time and money in was about to get changed and obsoleted, essentially. So I was captivated by the fact that there was something that was going to, around the corner, that was going to completely change certain areas of the business, the one I was in. And I just went on a search for information. I was so hungry for learning about this and getting ahead of the game. I got kind of obsessed with it. I would go and I would print out all kinds of information. I would organize it, and I would literally bind it. I would go, after I had a day job, I still had this company, and I would come home every night and read this stuff. I would get in the bathtub with a glass of wine and read for hours and hours and hours about this technology. And ultimately, I ended up learning enough about it and understanding how it was going to impact the business I was in that I ended up selling out to a partner and moving to Norway at the time, which is
what every entrepreneur does.
Everyone takes a path through Norway on the way to success.